To continue disproving one of the comments I received on my Sandopolis video, and to continue addressing some certain opinions about how I dislike most of Sonic 3 and Knuckles, despite me saying it's my favorite classic Sonic game, we're gonna talk about another extremely unique zone that manages to be good even though it's very different from the average good zone, and has minor faults, being Lava Reef Zone. This zone has some serious shoes to fill in, considering the fact that the zone before left a really bad taste in our mouths. So, does it live up to the expectations? Can it be considered among the best zones in the game, or is it just a bit away from what I would consider the greatest? Let's get into it. One big issue that pretty much everyone can agree on when it comes to Lava Reef is, you guessed it, the extremely long boss fights.
Yes, I know I complain about the boss of like every single video of mine, but let's just ignore that, okay?
Besides, I actually have a really good reason to genuinely dislike the boss fights that this zone has, and the reason is simply because, without a doubt, these two boss fights are by far the longest boss fights that the entirety of Sonic 3 and Knuckles has to offer. Frankly, it isn't even that close. The mini-boss has a foundation similar to Death Egg's boss, the last zone in the game, and the boss itself is the tankiest boss in all of classic Sonic, even tankier than the Death Egg robot. Yes, the final boss in Sonic 2. The mini-boss isn't really as bad as the boss because for the first attack you can focus on one of the tentacles that show up and kill it, do some damage to the hands, and then kill the other tentacle. From there, you can focus on the giant hand by getting in as much hand as possible before the hand moves away. Be warned, however, that the hand doesn't exactly work like Death Egg's hands. In the Death Egg fight, you can spin dash and not get hurt by the fingers backing you down, but in this fight you can. So, with all that being said, the mini-boss doesn't sound all that bad, right? The answer is actually yes. The attacks need to be dodged, it's not fundamentally a bad boss, and the issues I have with most other bosses being the placement, bad attacks, and non-technical gimmicks are not in the boss fight. Heck, it's even got some variation. So what's the problem? Well, it's pretty simple. For a mini-boss, heck, even for a boss, this boss fight takes way too many hits to beat. And I don't think it's that out of the pocket to say that no matter how interesting a boss fight is, it gets kind of tedious when it takes at least 6 hits, and majority of the time, 14 hits to beat. It should be noted that if you beat the arms first, the tentacles die too, but how the heck am I supposed to know that? And now we have the boss itself, and it was the longest amount of hits needed to be a boss fight unconditionally. Then the record was broken by Sonic 4 Episode 1, which had a 26 hit final boss and still holds that record to this day. But that's not important. I say unconditionally because like the mini-boss, it takes 14 hits to kill, but unlike the mini-boss, there's nothing you can do to stop the boss from being 14 hits. Why not just use Supersonic or Hypersonic? Surely, even though it takes a ludicrous amount of hits to kill, using a super transformation should help make the boss less tedious. Well, actually, no, it doesn't. Matter of fact, this boss is one of the rare bosses where turning into Super or Hypersonic actually harms your chances of getting through the boss because you can't even damage it. The boss shoots out mines that need to hit the mech 14 different times before he can die, so using 50 rings to turn Super without the flame shield, which is generously given to you right before the boss, will have you inevitably use all your rings and your transformation, leaving you with no protection to defend yourself against the boss. Again, there is a fire shield before the boss starts, so the easiest and fastest way for you to defeat this boss is to get the shield and jump over every single mine, which isn't a problem, but that means that the minimal time this boss takes is 42 seconds. For the average classic Sonic boss fight, that's a whole lot, and it's either extremely repetitive and boring jumping over spiky spheres, or trying your absolute best to try and not die to both lava and the mines and ultimately die to any number of reasons. The boss fights in Lava Reef are not good by any means, but they aren't like any bosses which I can say are completely irredeemable. With that said though, let's talk about why Lava Reef, despite its flaws, can match up with all of the other great zones in the game. Alright, now that we've discussed what I dislike about Lava Reef, let's talk about something I can really say is generally liked about the zone, being the music. Levels in classic Sonic rarely have a feel to the music. For example, Flying Battery's music is spectacular and fits the zone. I'm not going to deny that, but you can't really say there's a sense of theme that it has in its zone. But something that's obvious in Lava Reef is that, despite the zone being relatively normal, what happens after this zone is very crucial to the story. So the music kind of reflects that, having an ending that concludes instead of just looping back to the start. Maybe I'm just speaking absolute crap, but what I'm trying to say is that the zone has extremely good music, and I personally see a meaning behind it. The next thing I'd like to talk about is the visual aspect of the level, and it's amazing. Volcanic theming doesn't really seem all that interesting, but Lava Reef really amazes me with its clear technical gimmicks like the spitting spike balls, and the rocks that have a lot of depth really showing the heat. But that's nothing compared to the background, as both of them are absolutely amazing. The Act 1 background shows a clear night sky with glistening stars under a volcanic landscape, which looks really nice, and arguably the Act 2 background is even better, with magma and the back showing a cave. Both are really nice backgrounds that blend in with the actual gameplay really well. And the last thing I'd like to mention about Lava Reef is actually the level design, and it's actually a lot more complicated than oh, this level design is so good. Firstly, something I want to mention is that Lava Reef is really a relatively slow level. You're not going through too many loops or having prolonged speed sections, you're kind of just exploring the surprisingly open area. Now, I'm not saying the levels like Marble Garden or Carnival Night where there are many sections where you can simply not see any terrain other than the ground you're standing on. It's still clearly an enclosed area, but it's actually pretty wide compared to levels like Mystic Cave and Labyrinth Zone. This obviously brings up the question, is it fun? You know, because levels don't have good level design if they don't have 120 loops and mindlessly running forward. Alright, jeez, I'm sorry! Well, actually, it's not a bad zone in Act 1. The exploration is very fun, finding things like lightning, ring boxes, and lives is really cool. I will admit some gimmicks like the floating platform with the spikes on the bottom and the spiky balls that rotate in a 3D sort of way are questionable, but for the most part, it's not something I can say is bad. But Act 2? Boy, I don't like this act at all. Back in Act 1, there was a lava geyser that didn't bring you to complete stop, had a clear indication, and honestly looked kind of cool. It was a nice way for you to incorporate a part of the setting properly into a hazard that is fair. The equivalent of it in Act 2 doesn't fit well and doesn't have any type of warning, which is extremely annoying when you reach the hazard at higher speeds. In Lava Reef, the enemy that puts you in a gas that sucks your rings is kind of annoying, but in Act 1 they come in ones, and rolling pretty much guarantees that it isn't a problem. But look at this in Act 2! It's not even mentioning the absurd level design like moving platforms, having block movement, and it's a spring yard of all things, no real exploration or speed so nobody wins, and overall the huge difference between Act 1 and Act 2 isn't really a good thing for this zone. Overall, the boss fights in Act 2 aren't things I actually prefer in this zone, but the banger music, the amazing visuals, and the level design Act 1 displays are all things that contribute towards my statement that Lava Reef is, all in all, a great zone.
By the way, why didn't you talk about the Act 2 music? It's a lot different from the Act 1 music, so that means you didn't review the whole thing!
Well, first of all, this bit wouldn't exist if I did forget about the music, and secondly, the reason why I didn't review it is because of... Man, what can I even say about Hidden Palace? And you know, I don't even mean that in the sense that it's too good or too bad to the point that I don't know where to start. I mean in the sense that it's extremely short. Like really, where do I even begin? There really is only one place that can really direct my review on, and it's the boss fight, because before the boss fight, you're simply just getting to reach it, and after the boss, it's a cutscene taking you to Sky Sanctuary. So, let's start off and end off this review with the one thing Hidden Palace actually has, being the Knuckles boss fight. Firstly, I do want to talk about everything that happens before the boss in relation to it, because it's very important to the boss itself. Throughout Sonic's adventure through Angel Island, it's extremely obvious that Knuckles is a huge block in the way. He broke the bridge at the end of Angel Island, broke another one in Hydra City, turns off the light and turns on a sucking machine in Carnival Night, and overall, the game is very obviously stating that Knuckles is just a big jerk. He's trapping you constantly and stopping your journey, also teaming with Eggman, and it all ends here, not just for you, but also for Knuckles. On his side, he's trying to stop you from invading his island, and this is his last stand, as immediately after this, it's the Master Emerald, what he's protecting. This fight is the last thing Knuckles can possibly do before he can't do anything anymore. So, the boss fight, in that sense, is very good. In terms of how the boss is established, the symbolism, and the environment, the boss is always going to be one of the best in the series. Knuckles is always attacking you indirectly, so the fight makes sense for him to drop all his tactics and actually defend the Master Emerald with his body. And in the end, Sonic beats Knuckles and knocks him over in a very similar way that Knuckles did at the very beginning of the game. Yeah, I know I'm dragging the review out by talking about the story, but again, there really isn't much to talk about. Boss fight itself though, yeah, I've got to admit that boss fight sucks badly. There's a big saying within the Sonic community that until Sonic rushes boss fights with Blaze and Sonic, every other boss that is a character versus another character isn't really that good. And yeah, it's true with Metal Sonic being an anomaly. The boss doesn't live up to its hype at all. thankfully, it's not just like straight out bad, but if you look at the footage, you can easily see the problem with it. It has extremely easy to read and dodgeable attacks, and in my case, you might not even see it because Knuckles got stuck in a corner and I just beat him up without much issue. So overall, Hidden Palace isn't actually a bad zone by any means. It's a good climax to the story with a good segue into Sky Sanctuary, but that's about it. The boss fight that has been basically foreshadowed since the very beginning of the game isn't the greatest boss fight out there, but it's not like I'd rather this zone not exist. I think that the game files perfectly describe my opinions on Hidden Palace Zone. It's literally just the Lava Reef Act 3. So yeah, Hidden Palace is a good zone, but it's not making it onto anybody's top 5 Sonic zones.